Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. Today's presentation, Millions in Motion, Photographing Monarch Butterflies in Mexico, is brought to you by NatHab Expedition Leader Charlie Reinertsen. Charlie is the founder of Two Lined Studios and holds a dual master's degree in natural science education and environment and natural resources from the University of Wyoming. With more than a decade in conservation and science communication, he's a photographer and a videographer who created the Northern Peatlands Project, a photographic journey through one of Earth's rarest ecosystems. As an expedition leader, Charlie guides wildlife photography and ecology expeditions from Yellowstone to Mexico's Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve, bringing his diverse experience in visual storytelling and natural science to each trip. And he'll be leading in Iceland again this year for the first time. So, Charlie, welcome to the show. It's all yours. Take it away, my friend.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be presenting about Monarchs because in a few weeks, I'll be heading down to guide a couple trips. And this is also a really exciting time to be, thinking about monarch butterflies because we're really learning new information about them because of new technology. So if you've been staying up on some articles that have kind of hit the national news, there's new technology that's allowing us to track real-time movements of monarch butterflies, which, as you can imagine, it's blowing the minds of the scientific community to be able to really understand where individuals are traveling and when. And there are some limitations of that technology, but it's light years ahead of where we used to be, which was this old kind of sticker tagging system where you would just put a little sticker that would ID that individual, and it would require reporting on seeing where that individual is. And we're talking about this, and this is important because monarch butterflies complete one of the most insane migrations on the planet. They can travel 3,000 miles and go to a place where their great ancestors spent the winter. And then they spend the winter there. They extend their lifespan. But we're going to get all into that in a few moments here. I'm just getting ahead of myself because I'm excited. We're going to talk photography. We're going to talk monarch ecology. And I'll share some tips and tricks in terms of what I've learned about what works well in terms of what to pack to bring down if you're interested in photographing the monarchs. We'll talk about the actual itinerary of the trip itself. So let's get into it. My path with photography started with these little guys. The smooth softshell turtle and the spiny softshell turtle. I was in a research lab at the St. Olaf College in Minnesota, and I was able to do some independent research on these turtles. And while I was doing that research, I also was taking photography courses, and so I had a camera on loan from the school, and so I would just document everything I was doing in the field and try and capture portraits of some of the incredible creatures that I was meeting along the way. These softshell turtles occupy river habitats. They're incredibly fast swimmers. They can swim up to 25 miles per hour. Females get to the size of like garbage can lids, and males, they have sexual dimorphism. So the females and males are much different sizes. The males are kind of like 6 to 8 inch diameter on the shell. And as you can see, they have this really soft tissue on their shells as well. And through our research, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources really wanted to know whether these populations were healthy. And so we were looking at the genetics of these populations, and we were actually able to make some recommendations to the DNR that the smooth softshell was actually in need of greater protection because it had a lower genetic diversity than its very similar species, the spiny softshell turtle. But in that time period, I was meeting all these amazing critters, and I was getting a lot more excited about sharing the stories that I was learning. and a lot less interested in the research, because at the end of the day, it's a lot more fun to create a beautiful picture that inspires than it is to write down data points, at least for me. So I started to really dive into it. This is a saw wet owl that we were banding and doing a study on the population in Weaver Dunes, Minnesota. And that ultraviolet image is, you're able to tell the age of an owl based on the reflection patterns of that wing under ultraviolet light. So I was just getting really fascinated about how can I share these incredible stories? How can I inspire people to protect this one home that we have on this planet? And so I kind of launched into a career in science communications, and I moved up to Adirondack Park. I live in Saranac Lake, New York, to be able to work on a climate solutions exhibit for the Wild Center. And that really, got me engaged in this place and gave me another outlet for photography. And then when I wrapped that exhibit up, I was able to launch my own business with Two Line Studio, and it's allowed me to work with clients around the world, including natural habitat adventures. And these trips are like my opportunity to get to share my passion for the world with other people. A lot of my work is on the computer. Like I'll go out and go on assignment for a photography or a video shoot, come home, and it's a lot of post-production. And so these trips are my chance to get to teach again, because that's really where I spent a good amount of time, was teaching in the field as well. So let me just bop ahead here to the monarch butterflies. A couple shots of the exhibit that I was working on. So photographing the monarch wintering grounds. This is a pretty challenging thing, and there are a lot of really cool opportunities. So I'll just give you a little bit of ecology about the butterfly, because when you understand the ecology, it gives you a better idea of what types of photography opportunities there are to be able to tell the story. Because to me, a picture is all about trying to tell a story about what you're trying to photograph. So right now, there are about 50 to 100 million butterflies that are making this migration. Monarch butterflies exist all around the world, but this is the only place where they're doing this long of a migration, traveling up to 3,000 miles to an area that's about 2.5 hectares or 5 football fields. So all those butterflies that spread out throughout from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the eastern seaboard throughout the summer, once they hit winter, they're converging on one particular place that has the perfect climate so that they can just have a really low level of activity and not freeze. That's the key. They're trying to find this Goldilocks zone where they don't have to expend very much energy, and they can just wait out the winter until there's a greater food availability to be able to start the cycle again. So here are some photographs, some scenes that you might see when you're in the wintering grounds visiting the Monarch Biosphere Reserve. There are these sweeping views. You're at a really high elevation when you're actually visiting the reserves. And so you have these beautiful views out to the transvolcanic mountain ranges that cut across central Mexico. And all those little dots, those are butterflies. A little bit hard to see if you're not on a big screen. If you take a minute to look at this image, you'll realize that the trunk of the center tree is completely covered in butterflies. And the trunk on the right does not have butterflies on it. And the more you look, the more you realize that all those things you thought were leaves are actually butterflies clustered together. Here you're starting to get some sunshine hitting a cluster of butterflies, and some of those butterflies are taking flight. We're going to talk about that in a moment. This is a very typical scene in the reserves, and I'm going a little bit quickly, but I'm going to stop and talk a little bit more as we go. This is a typical scene because the butterflies are trying to, again, minimize their activity. They're trying to save as much energy as possible so they can get through until the spring, so the March, April, so that they can start their journey north. And during this time in the winter, they've actually gone into diapause. So they've effectively made themselves sterile. They no longer have reproductive organs that are functional, and they convert into a body type that stores more sugar, more carbohydrates, so that they can extend their lifespan and maintain really low levels of activity. But when it gets warm and sunny, so if it gets above 50, 55 degrees and it's sunny and calm, the butterflies are going to warm up so much that they actually need to cool themselves down, because if they get too hot, their metabolic rate increases and they start to process those sugars, and that depletes their reserves. And so their objective is to stay cool, to stay calm, and to get some water and to get some sugar when they need it. So you see in the foreground of this image, there's a plant with flowers. There are a lot of flowering plants in the Oyamel fir forest, which is this ecosystem. And the monarch butterflies will feed on that nectar throughout the day, and then they'll go to little creeks and streams and drink water. But when they get too warm, they're going to fly. And they're flying to actually cool down. So they're using that process of convection, of moving through the air current to actually release heat and to be able to cool themselves down. But if you get there in the morning and it's not sunny, or it's not quite warm enough, or maybe it's windy, the monarch butterflies are going to be clustered together because they're trying to stay warm. So overnight, temperatures can drop, and monarch butterflies cannot survive very long below freezing, so 32 degrees Fahrenheit. If they go below that and they get wet, that's when they're going to die. And you can have huge die-off events when there's kind of freak storms in this area that are colder than this area would normally have. And interestingly, one of the big challenges of monarch butterflies and understanding the ecology of them is that it's really hard to count them. Look at this scene right here, and everything is loaded with butterflies, and you can't disturb them. How do you possibly have any way of being able to count how many butterflies are on a branch that's weighed down with the weight of butterflies? Really hard. And so on one of those winters that was incredibly tough, where a lot of butterflies died, researchers were actually able to go out and count the number of butterflies on the ground, and that helped them understand how many butterflies are in a tree. So a lot of the data that we find when we look at the population of monarch butterflies, we're extrapolating to have an estimate of how many butterflies there are. We can never have a true count of the number of butterflies, but we can estimate how many butterflies are on a tree when it's covered based on some of those mortality studies. And then we can look at how much of the forest is occupied by butterflies. And we do that through assessments from scientists who are actually on the ground looking at the number of trees that the monarchs are occupying, the percentage of coverage. And then we also do that from aerial surveillance. So you can actually see the orange color from the air. So if you're to fly a drone, if you're to have GPS imaging or satellite imaging that's high quality enough, you can actually see where the monarch butterflies are occupying the forest. So here you're seeing more and more light coming into play, and monarch butterflies are so much fun from a photography standpoint because they kind of operate like stained glass. You have so much transparency to work with, so it's really fun to play around with light positioning where you are in relation to the butterfly and the sun. So definitely try some shots where the sun is behind you, but don't shy away from having the sun behind your subject, and having some backlight create some really cool shots. So this is an example of that, just looking straight up into the canopy of the Oyamel fir trees. And this is a moment when the temperature reached a certain point, and it can happen so quickly. You can go from this to this in a matter of minutes, where suddenly there's a cascade of butterflies just because they hit that temperature where they need to cool down, and then the air is filled. The other neat thing that you can look for And I think I see a couple examples. It's hard to point out in this image. This photo is taken towards the end of February, early March, and that's when some of the butterflies are regaining the ability to reproduce. And so when they do reproduce, they go into a nuptial flight where they actually fly together while conjoined. And the male is actually providing not only sperm, but what's called a spermatophore. And that spermatophore is basically all the energy that that male has left, a gift to the female to power her flight to the next phase. So once she's mated and her eggs are inseminated, then she's going to make her way north to the next stage. And then it's going to be 4 generations, maybe 5, of butterflies dispersing into North America before they turn around and come south in that last generation. So another scene that is very familiar down there is there are all of these flowering plants that you can find, and the monarch butterflies are going to feed on the nectar. While the caterpillar phase of the monarch butterfly is dependent on milkweed, the adult butterfly can drink from any number of nectar sources. So you'll see them feeding on milkweed related plants as well as other plants as well. And this is a shot looking at, you can kind of tell it's a wet area. There's some reflection from where you can see the water. But this is another scene that you often see later in the day. All the butterflies coming down for a drink of water, just clustering together. There's some really neat photography opportunities when that happens. This is one of those shots that everybody's looking for, is just trying to get an image where the wings are in focus and displayed and the light is just pouring through them. I've seen a lot of great examples of this. This was okay. I'm excited to try that again. If you know about monarch butterflies, you know that they're able to sequester the cardiac glycosides that are in monarch and milkweed plants. Milkweed plants are fairly toxic, very toxic. Those chemicals would potentially stop the heart of a number of different animals if they eat too much of it. But monarch caterpillars have evolved to be able to tolerate that toxin and then also sequester it and incorporate it into their own tissue, both as a larval phase, as a caterpillar, and then after metamorphosis through the chrysalis and into the adult form. So there are only a couple predators that are able to eat the monarch butterfly, and the notch that's missing from this wing is from one of them. So there are a couple birds and a mouse that live in the Oyamel fir forest who are able to tolerate, they aren't immune to the toxin, but they are able to tolerate it, and they'll put up with, kind of vomiting or feeling sick after eating monarch butterflies because the food source is so prevalent in the area. So you're seeing butterflies mating. This is happening towards the end of the season, as I was mentioning earlier. But now let's get into the photo tips kind of specifically. That was just to kind of give you an idea of the different scenes that you might see while you're down there. But now let's talk a little bit more technically about what I would think about and what I will be thinking about as I head back down. At the time, I was guiding in 2023 most recently for the monarch butterfly migration. And I was then shooting with a Nikon Z6 with a 20 to 200 millimeter 2.8. That was a great lens. I was really happy with it. One of the things that's nice about this zoom lens is that the zooming happens internally. So some zoom lenses, when you zoom in, the lens is actually going to expand and then contract. One of the things that you're going to come up against when you're in the monarch butterfly area is that there's a significant amount of dust. If you have a lens that expands and contracts, every time you do that, you're going to be sucking in dust into your lens itself. So whenever I'm in dusty environments, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about whether it's worth using a zoom lens or and it's, you know, I'm willing to take on the risk of getting some dust in my components, or if I want to go with fixed lenses and avoid that. For me, I get to circumvent that because this particular lens, while it might bring in a little bit of dust, it's fairly sealed and it's not actually doing those movements that would draw dust into the lens itself. Another thing you can do if you do have a zoom lens is you can put it into a fixed position that you want to use. So maybe you know that you want it to be at the 200 millimeter length, and then do not adjust it while you're out in the field, or put it inside your backpack, make sure your hands are dust free, zip it up as much as you can so that there's no dust around, and then make the adjustment that you want to make. I'm pretty fastidious about this because I want my gear to last for a long time, but dust is definitely something to think about when it comes to photography, and you can get dust covers for your cameras. I don't, because I usually use fixed lenses. This year, I'm gonna bring a little bit of a different kit because last time, I was really disappointed that I didn't have a few of my tools. This year I'm bringing a Z8, which is a phenomenal camera, huge upgrade over the Z6. I'll be using a 400 millimeter 4.5S. One of the things that you encounter, especially on a cold, cloudy day, is really low light. You're in the midst of the OEML fir forest with a pretty significant canopy. So even when it's sunny, there's a lot of shade. And so a lot less light than you would normally get if you were thinking about like out in Wyoming on the open plains. So having a lens that lets in a lot of light, which prime lenses are always going to let in a bit more light than their zoom counterparts, and then a really fast lens helps as well. And then the other thing to note is to not be afraid of bumping your ISO. Technology has come so far that that's something that you can either address in post, or your camera is able to handle it internally and not generate very much noise. The 35 and the 20 millimeter, those two lenses are my two favorite. The 35 millimeter is just basically how I feel that I see the world just with my eye in terms of the optical view. The 20 millimeter has like a little special something. It's giving a tiny bit of fisheye, not very much, a little bit of distortion around the outside. But what I really love about this lens is that it's functionally a macro lens. The focusing distance is incredibly close to the end of the lens, so you can get really close to your subject, Monarch butterfly, and then also include a lot of the background and have the subject in focus, which is really cool. And those are obviously really fast lenses. And then the thing that I'm waffling about, I really did enjoy the 70-200 when I brought it, so I think I might include that, and I might include a 105 millimeter macro, but this is only because I'm really excited about certain photos, and I'll talk about those in a minute, that will make it worth it to bring this whole kit. But I would encourage you to take as little as possible, because I'm really grateful that I've done the trip with minimal gear so that my primary focus was just on this mind-blowing experience that you'll never get to experience again. I'm incredibly fortunate that I get to guide in this area and I get to go back. And so I'm going to deal with having a bunch of gear because I would like to get a few more shots that I don't have in my library right now. The other thing I'll mention is that I never was a proponent of like mentioning certain types of gear. And I feel like I'm doing a commercial right now for different gear. There's a ton of different companies that you can get gear from that probably are exactly like this gear. But I like to share what I do because if someone had told me about this stuff earlier, I'd be a lot happier. So I'll just show you a couple things. This is Natural Habitat Adventures Black Hole 30-liter bag, and I've mounted onto the backpack this Peak Design clip. And it's phenomenal. Your camera, there's a little tripod plate that you mount onto your camera, and then it just slides in here and locks the camera in place. And it's the most comfortable way to carry a camera that I've ever experienced. Really excited about that for this year. That'll be different. And then inside this bag, the large Peak Design camera cube fits perfectly. So I'll show you that. And feels like show and tell at school. This is everything that I just mentioned inside here, as well as batteries, as well as something to be able to clear dust if I need to out of the sensor. So this will be everything I bring for camera equipment, and I'm willing to take on that much in part because I can pack really light when it comes to what I'm wearing on the trip, because it gets, it's fairly moderate temperatures. It's not an incredibly cold place. So I know exactly what I need to bring for clothing that'll pack really tight so that I can bring a lot more camera equipment. And then I'm going to maybe consider bringing a really small, cheap, light tripod. My more expensive tripod has these legs that will suck dust in, and I don't really want to deal with that larger tripod. Sometimes I usually have two tripods. One of them is really cheap, kick around, light, small, and then one of them is really nice. And so this trip, I would recommend kind of a cheap, light one. All right. Specific tips on cold and cloudy conditions. So I've put down the settings that I used for each picture. You're going to get some really flat light in the morning. If you've got some high clouds, the sun isn't quite up yet, butterflies aren't moving, and as you can see, it's kind of hard to get contrast into the image. Right now you're looking at a handheld shot at the 70 millimeter length. My f-stop is fairly open so I can let more light in. And then I'm shooting at ISO 1250. Looking at the shutter speed, there was no reason why I needed to shoot at 1/500. If I were to do this again, I would go ahead and shoot at like 1/100 and then bump that ISO down. There was probably a reason why I didn't do that. But that's what I ended up doing on this one. And then a tripod would be helpful in this scenario because you'd be able to drop that shutter speed way down because you'd be on a stable mount. Now this shot I was really happy with, and this is something to keep an eye out for. Something I'll recommend is that you're going to have moments where areas are spotlight, illuminated, and then other areas that are incredibly dark. And so I'd play around with some low-key images where you're actually underexposing. And what I love is choosing highlight priority metering. So if you just Google how to engage highlight priority metering for, and then insert your camera name, a million people will tell you how to do it. But I really like it because it's going to expose for the highlights. So it'll just basically darken your image and make it perfectly exposed for where the light is hitting. You can also, if you're shooting manually, just do that yourself without finding highlight priority. I often shoot with aperture priority because I want to be able to switch really quickly between settings, and I find that to be a pretty true to place where I want to be in terms of exposure. I'm usually in evaluative metering, I'm usually in aperture priority, and then I'm using the exposure compensation, which is right here on the trigger finger, and then using the dial to be able to expose, underexpose, or overexpose. So that's my process. Everybody's different. Some people have function buttons programmed so that they can have just a one button click and it'll drop the exposure 2 stops. Everybody has a different process, but the point is play around with darker images than you would expect. Once again, I wish I had a tripod. I'd like to shoot at a slower shutter speed for these shots. And I wished that I had a longer lens. 200 millimeters was not enough. I think 400 is plenty. 800 would be overkill, but you'd probably get a couple cool shots that you wouldn't be able to get with a 400. But I really think 400 is the sweet spot, or if you've got a 300, that's going to do a great job as well. For me personally, I'm not a teleconverter person. I've always found that a digital crop is going to do the same thing as a teleconverter. If you ever do a side-by-side comparison for pixel perfect, like you're just going to find, in my mind, that the teleconverter, the amount of light that you lose is going to give you the same softness as if you just cropped into the image or even just selected DX instead of FX image size. On this shot, once again, you're dealing with low light. There's no light hitting the subject. So I had the ISO up at 800. I wanted a fast shutter speed, 1/400, to make sure that butterfly, if there was any movement, that it's crisp, and a really wide open aperture to be able to get a nice bokeh and to be able to have the focus just on the butterfly and nothing else. And again, I'm always, in a shot like this, I'm always wishing I have a little bit more length. You're limited to the paths that are created. There's ropes. You cannot go beyond the ropes. So your flexibility to get the image you want is limited by the lenses you have. And so for me, I was really missing having a little bit more reach. And then I was also wishing I had a macro lens, because sometimes the butterflies are 2 inches away from your hand. Sometimes they'll land on you. And it would just be really fun to have a macro lens to play around with. There's also, don't shy away from looking at the ground, look at different compositions. And once again, we're looking at pushing the ISO because it's so dark. This is just another shot that I really liked, play around with composition. The orange color is really beautiful, and it also appears in so many different ways depending on the lighting conditions. So try and capture as much of that as you can. My biggest tip for photography is just never stop exploring possibilities. So one of the things that you could do for this image is focus stack. So sometimes you can run a program in your camera that's called focus stacking, and it'll take as many pictures as you want. You tell it, I want 10 pictures, and I'll set the focus so that you get 10 pictures with slight variance on where the focus is sitting. And then in post-production, you can stack those images and create an image that has infinite focus. So that's one way to get around a lens where you need to be wide open on the aperture because you need more light, but you wish you could have everything in focus. So if you focus stack, that's a way to get around that problem. I just loved this shot. The ejidatarios are the owners of the land. The community there is very protective and very proud of this forest and of the monarch butterfly ecology. So I really love this picture, just capturing one of our guides who accompany you. No matter what visitor you are, you'll have a guide accompanying you into the actual reserve itself, who is a part owner of that land. So the Mexican government, when they set aside these reserves, they actually worked with landowners in the area, ejidatarios, to be able to help steward this land and protect this land. So I just really love this shot as well. All right, now photo tips for warm, sunny conditions. This is where a little bit of technical knowledge is really helpful. So this is the shot that everybody wants. If you could, if wishes were fishes, maybe the butterflies would be bigger. But you want the butterfly to be frozen in motion. You want to get that stained glass effect and the blue skies in the background. Once again, to make the butterflies bigger, you've got to have a longer lens. This 200 millimeter wasn't quite cutting it for me. But basically, this takes a lot of repetition. You need to take as many shots as possible. You just need to hold down the trigger. You need to be in manual focus. So you're going to set the manual focus to say, I want the butterflies that are 10 feet above me to be in focus. And then set your aperture maybe as, into the f8 to f11 realm, so that there's as much in focus as possible. And the key here is the shutter speed. These butterflies are moving at a good clip and they're tiny, so you can blur motion really easily without wanting to. So I find 1/3200 is kind of the magic number. You can get away with maybe a little bit slower than that, but basically go into shutter priority, select that as your variable, and then go from there. Or if you're shooting fully manual, that's great. So I held down the button quite a bit. Looking back on this, I wish I had held it down longer and more often. This is not a moment to be precious about your memory, your storage. Bring a few extra cards, make sure you've got plenty of storage. This is something you want to capture and want to have. I was happy with what I was able to get, but I'm really excited this year with the 400 millimeter. And also just like having practiced this technique, it's a really unique experience. And I'd like to try it again. You might even find as you're looking through here that you've got a copulating pair that's actually in your frame, which is a fun realization. I can't remember if any of them are in this frame. But this is more what you're going for. I wish the sky had a little more blue. I'm pretty true to what I shoot. I don't like to bring in too many things in post. But you're seeing that this is a really high key image. Like the highlights are, when you look at the meter over here, everything is kind of going off in the upper range of the spectrum. I could have underexposed this a bit more, but I really like how the wings are they're like stained glass. Once again, you're seeing this one. I even went to 1/6400 to just freeze motion as much as possible. ISO 400, it's a really bright scene, so you have that working in your advantage. And once again, f7.1. So those are kind of the magic numbers you're shooting for to be able to get these types of scenes. This is one that I want to play with more. If I get the opportunity to have something like this again, I'm just going to hold down the shutter and get as many photos as I can until the right composition just happens to happen. Same numbers. This one, it looks like I was able to freeze motion at 1/1600 with a 200 millimeter lens. And remember that if you are going to have a longer lens length, you need to shoot even faster. So right now, 1/1600 worked at 200 millimeters. If I'm at 400 millimeters, I'm going to want to get up into the 1/3200 again, because the rule of thumb for stability in landscapes is if your lens is 20 millimeters, you need to have 1/40, double the lens length, 1 over that as your exposure time. So in this instance, I'm way beyond that, but that's because I'm freezing really fast motion of something very, very small. All right, cruising along here. This is a big one. Us photographers can get very obsessive, and it's so important that, for me, the first time that I went into the area where the butterflies were, I had a rule that my camera was going to stay in the backpack for the first day. And I mostly followed that rule. And you just want to remember to be present and to have times where you put the camera in the bag and just be in the place, because it's magical. It's something you don't want to forget, and you don't want to remember it through your photos. You want to remember it through being there. With that said, let's get back into the photos. This is a really cool one where just the lighting was really fun, where we had this dappled light coming through the tree canopy, and then these backlit monarchs. I mean, this is the stuff that you dream of, being able to photograph this type of a scene. This is one that I absolutely loved. This is an image that I cropped into because I only had the 200 millimeter. I'm a broken record here, but the lens I want is the 400 millimeter. Most of the time, these clustered butterflies are further away from you than you would like. And so you're, giving them a respectful distance. You're also behind a ribbon, you're on the trail, and they're in the creek. And so if you had a little more reach, you'd be able to get an even sharper shot. This one can't be, I can probably print this at like 30 by 30 without losing detail, but if you wanted to do a massive print, which would be the dream of something like this, you'd really want a longer lens so you're not cropping in. Playing around with composition is really fun. Like these look like little sailboats, I think, because you've given it more depth by including the background of the scene. And then once again, we're in a really low key image. Look at the exposure, look at the histogram. We're sitting at the bottom of the histogram with a lot of darks and very few highlights. And that was a manual override. If I had just shot this automatic or in aperture priority without any exposure compensation, you would have a really bright image that honestly would be really boring. And for these particular shots, I try and get the whites to be the properly exposed highlight. So there's still detail in the whites with the white colors on the butterflies, and then exposed for that. The other thing is just be playful. Like this image is entirely out of focus. And the thing that I love to do, which I'm excited to do this time, is more film. Entirely out of focus, backlit butterflies, and they just look like lights moving around the video. And you can play with like bringing in, you can start there with your focus and then bring it into focus so that it slowly comes in. So you go from lights to suddenly it's actually butterflies in motion. And that's a big part of why I'm bringing the tripod as well, is that I want to be stable. I want to be able to get these low light conditions. I want to be able to get more film because the film of the butterflies moving around and just like they're interacting with one another, and there's so many in the air. It's like being in a snow globe of butterflies. It's so much fun, and it's just prepare yourself for kind of having your mind blown. It's a really magical experience. Once again, I mean, this might be one of my favorite two shots. I'd like to play around with this more. You don't get this very often where it's just so sunny in the forest, and I want to play around with this scene, but it happens really quickly and you have to get what you can. And I would have liked to have tried really adjusting the settings and playing around with the settings until I found something that I really liked. But I did like how some of the monarchs are out of focus, so they just kind of look like lights in the forest, more like fireflies. The image on the right is really fun on this spread because all that orange that you're seeing that's coming across that image on the right, that's just a butterfly really close to the lens. I mean, that butterfly was probably inches away from my lens, and because it was there, it colored the whole image orange. It was almost like holding up an orange filter or putting an orange filter on my lens. So I really loved that one. You can see the difference with the one on the left. This shot, you're going to come home and edit your photos, and you'll see happy accidents. You'll see things that you wish that butterfly had just turned right at the right moment so you could get the wings, because these two butterflies on the right, once again, low key image, you're really underexposing or exposing for the highlights. It's a playground. It's super fun. Another one where you're shooting into the shadows and the light. Your histograms are going to be, if you're a person who's really trying to create a nice natural bell curve on the histogram, you're going to have a hard time. This is harsh lighting, or it's incredibly flat and dull lighting. So that's the big challenge. And there's no artificial light in these areas. We're not going to disturb the monarch butterflies. You want to take care of them. So you go in, and whatever light you get is the light you've got. This is just on the way out. Covered trucks to be able to get you up to the monarch butterfly grounds, and this beautiful sunset looking out over the transvolcanic mountains. Can tell I'm getting excited. It's feeling real that I'm going back. Next time, once again, tripod would be exciting. Can't wait to bring that down. A couple variables there. The other idea too is to put your camera down and pick up your phone. The phone, you've got slow motion in there that's incredibly fun to play around with. One of my favorite things to do is like gather up with your friends and have somebody have the phone in slow motion and walk towards you. And then all the butterflies will just be streaming around you, and it's a very cool experience. Phones have a really good ability to be able to capture. So here's what I was just talking about. Our group on a Photo Pro expedition, butterflies just streaming all around. The phone does a great job with portraits. It gets those little moments that you didn't get with the big camera. And phones have really caught up. This would be if you're trying to bring less in your kit. If you've got the right phone, you can leave your wide angle behind potentially, depending on what your quality that you're looking for, or the flexibility that you want. And then the last thing I'll say before you go, if you're trying to be ready, go practice in the backyard with leaves. I know it's a bad season for that with twigs. Try and focus on really small things from really far away, both manual focus and auto focus. Put it onto pin focus and move that pin around and practice moving the pin around and focusing on one thing and moving it to another. Try and do that really quickly. And just really know your camera before you go. And one of the ways you can also study up is know your heroes. Jaime Rojo is the premier monarch butterfly photographer. He's been heavily featured with National Geographic over the recent years, and he's making incredible photos. He's telling the full story, the full ecological story. In this photo in the center, he has this series of photos where there was like perfect conditions for fog and light streaming through the forest, and the monarchs are backlit. And he's a really great person to support. So check him out. We're running out of time. I'm going to breeze through these slides so that we can leave a little time for questions. So day one, which is after the real day one where you get into Mexico City and you meet your group on the welcome dinner. Then the next day, I'm calling day one, is driving out in a coach bus from Mexico City to El Rosario. And you actually get your first opportunity to visit the reserve, and you can see the excitement. That was one of my guests from a couple of years ago. And then in the evening, you check into the first hotel. The hotels are really comfortable. They can get cold, so you want to bring some warm sleep layers. And it doesn't get too cold here typically overnight, but it's good to have some fleece pants and sweatshirt to sleep in. And then on day two, we make our way to another reserve, Sierra Cinque. And typically we're using horses to be able to get up the first portion of the hike. And then after that, we hike to reach the butterflies, and spend some time in Angangeo, kind of the hub for sustainable ecotourism. Once was a mining town, then a logging town, and now it runs off of butterfly tourism. And then we go back to El Rosario. And we're back to El Rosario because it's the area where typically it has the most monarch butterflies in terms of acreage. And we really like going back to that spot twice. We go to the reserves multiple days because you want to see different weather conditions. You want to see what it's like, if it's cold or if it's warm or if it's sunny. And then day 4, we're now going to Jungapeo for another ecosystem to be able to check out. And all along the way, there's so many other wildlife that you can experience beyond monarch butterflies. And then we make our way to Toluca, and then we make our way to Mexico City. And this is really, departure day, or if you're extending your stay, there are some incredible places to be able to check out right in the city. So there are a lot of ways to support monarch butterflies. Plant native milkweed where you live, provide nectar plants for the journey, limit mowing, and support beneficial farming practices. That's a really big one because pesticides and herbicides are one of the main factors influencing the population of monarch butterflies right now. We've got a pretty good handle on the conservation of the wintering grounds. There are some issues coming in with climate change. We still have some issues with illegal logging operations in their wintering grounds. But for the most part, we've had some incredible conservation success with this species, but it's still at risk for all the factors that you're probably familiar with. And these are some really great ways that you can support this population. So with that, I'd love to invite questions. We can talk about specific camera things about the trip. Give me a follow on Instagram. That's a huge way to support photographers. You can find me at Two Line Studio, and feel free to send me a message there or by email. I'm always happy to answer questions or chat.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. So before we dive into the question section, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. Just go to the upper right-hand corner where you see those 3 lines. Go ahead and click there, and it'll open up the question field, and you can go ahead and put the questions in there. So Charlie, do you know how many generations of monarchs occur during an entire annual cycle?
Yeah, so we're looking at basically 4 generations before that 4th or 5th generation then goes into a migratory pattern to be able to return. So it's something that I conceptually understood from an ecological perspective. I understood that happened. I read about it. I knew it happened. But until I went there, I didn't feel it. And understanding that these creatures are actually traveling 3,000 miles, they've never been to this pinpoint location in this transvolcanic mountain range. They're getting there by detecting geomagnetic fields, by having an internal clock and an understanding of the position of the sun and the direction they should fly, and also having a genetically based memory for locations or visible line of sight indicators for where to travel as they go down their route. I mean, this whole thing is completely, we're understanding it through science, but it's hard not to feel like it's completely mystical and magical. And when you see it in person, it actually registers that this is real, this actually happens, and these butterflies are continuing to perplex scientists in terms of how they're actually pulling this off.
Yeah, it seems pretty amazing. I mean, so where are they leaving from? So we have one guest who says that you can see them from the beaches of Toronto. Where are all the monarchs coming from?
Yeah, let me go back to the beginning and pull that slide up. I think we went by it pretty quickly. Here we are. That one. So you're seeing in this image those funnels, right? So monarch butterflies exist in that orange area, all the way from, they're in the Rocky Mountains, all the way out to the eastern seaboard, all the way up into Canada. And so when we talk about the reverse of this in the springtime, when you get into March, these butterflies are starting to fly north. And so they'll make it roughly to Texas. And then they'll lay their eggs. The caterpillars will go through their life cycle. They'll hatch, metamorphose, and emerge. And then they will fly further north and pursue food and resources. So each generation kind of disperses across the landscape. So if you're to follow one lineage, every time a monarch butterfly reproduces, they're producing 400 eggs. You know, not all of those are viable, not all of those will survive, but say 20 survive to adulthood and fly north. Those 20 butterflies could disperse in any direction. They don't all go in the same direction. They could go up through the Midwest, they could go out to the eastern seaboard. And so 4 generations will happen. And then on that last generation, there are environmental triggers from the position of the sun in the sky to the senescence, the death of plants, where the chemical composition of plants changes, and that triggers a biological response in the monarch butterflies to actually shift and lose the ability to reproduce and to go into a migratory pattern. So it's, again, it's wild. I mean, what we know about them is pretty staggering. What we don't know about them is also a huge amount, and we're still trying to understand it.
But thank you for giving us some more clarification on that, Charlie. It is unbelievable. It really is. All right, let's switch over to cameras for a minute here. Do you have any advice for white balance? Is there a good default setting that I should be putting my camera on? Can you help out a little bit?
Yeah, cameras have come such a long way. Every camera company is a little bit different. There's a joke that Sony is really green, Canon is really orange, red, and Nikon shoots really flat. Nikon is my go-to because it shoots really flat and really neutral. If you shoot raw file format, you're also going to shoot really neutral and flat, and almost regardless of how you're setting your white balance. But for me personally, unless I'm filming, if I'm doing photography, almost all the time I'm using auto white balance. With that said, if I need consistency across scenes, which a lot of times you're punching into the shadows and then you're coming out into the light, sometimes I'll bring a color card and I'll take a picture of that color card in the lighting condition that I'm in. And then you can use that in post editing to be able to select your color. Another trick that I like is if it's a sunny day, just set it to 5000K and forget about it. If you set it there, that's basically daylight color. And then in post-production, you can kind of warm it up or cool it down according to your memory of it. Like, I'm always judging against my memory and trying to recreate the experience that I had. I'm not trying to create something that I didn't experience. And so for me, I try and shoot it really flat. And then the other thing, you can go into Kelvin settings, and there's just, you use your thumb to be able to move that pin around on the Kelvin scale or even the color scale. And you look through your viewfinder on a lot of these mirrorless cameras, all the mirrorless cameras, you're getting a real-time feedback loop of what the camera sees. When we had SLRs, single lens reflex, you're looking through a mirror and then the digital image was interpreting that. So in this instance, we're actually getting a digital readout of how it's perceiving color. So you can actually look at the surroundings and look on the big screen on the back and adjust that Kelvin setting until what you see on the screen is exactly what you see in the world. And again, you're going to still want to edit in post just because we're obsessive, because we're photographers.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Let's talk about filters. Do you recommend bringing any filters if I'm coming to see the Monarchs?
I hate putting anything between my glass and the world, so I'm anti-filter, and that's just my style. I've seen people, I've been recently maybe convinced that I should start using polarized filters, but even that, it's just one more piece of gear. It's one more thing that gets dirty and that needs to be cleaned. It's one more thing that can trap dust. For me personally, I'm not a filter guy. I'll use neutral density filters when I'm filming, but in photography, I'm just shooting the glass that I have.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So tell me, Charlie, what is the best part of the Monarch trip for a photographer?
Put the camera down and just experience it. It's the best. It can't be beat. The photography part is icing on the cake, but just go do it and have fun.
Excellent advice, Charlie. Thank you for that. Well, unfortunately, that is going to be the last question that we have time for today. So I'm going to throw it back to you for some closing comments.
Sure. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. It's fun to chat about this and get excited to go. If you have questions, reach out. You can find me at charlie@2line.com, or check out my website and follow me on the various social media platforms. Goes a long way to helping to get my work out there. So thanks for tuning in.
And Charlie, thanks for being here. We really do appreciate you presenting for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us. So if you are interested in information on how you could travel to see monarchs with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. And if you're part of a photo club and would like NatHab to speak to your members about nature and travel photography, email us at webinars@nathab.com. Join us Monday for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and the replay will be available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. So long, everybody. We'll see you next time.